Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Ever get this feeling like,
Mm.
like the ground could just shift? I don't know.
Uh-huh.
Like what we think is permanent could just vanish. Poof.
That's kind of what we're looking at today, the collapse of the Soviet Union. You sent over this intense podcast lecture, how the Soviet Union ended the last days. So yeah, get ready. We're going back to the late 20th century when the world kind of watched this superpower just crumble.
It's a moment in history that, well, it still surprises us, right? When something that seemed impossible just happens.
Yeah. I mean, for decades, the Soviet Union was the communist power. But from this lecture, by the early 1980s, things weren't so great behind the Iron Curtain.
It needed a reset or something, you know?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Behind the scenes, the system was really struggling. The economy was stagnant, central planning, shortages were just normal. Imagine going to the store not to browse, but just to see what they might actually have.
And on top of that, this crazy arms race with the U.S.
Oh man, talk about pressure. Keeping up with the Joneses, but the Joneses have nukes.
Okay, so then enter Mikhail Gorbachev. This lecture frames him as the reformer, someone who saw that the old ways weren't working.
Absolutely. Gorbachev, he was different, a total break from those old Soviet leaders, you know? He wanted new thinking, which he called it Glasnost and Perestroika.
Okay, I gotta be honest. Those sound a little more like, I don't know, menu items than political movements. What did those actually mean for people living in the Soviet Union?
Picture this. You can't speak your mind, right? You can't criticize the government at all. That was life before Glasnost. It means openness. Gorbachev, he wanted to let people speak freely, to allow some transparency.
So like being able to say, hey, this bread tastes awful,
Yeah.
after years of pretending it was fine.
Yeah, kind of like that, but much bigger, right? Glasnost wasn't just about breadlines. It was about dissent, debating, accessing information that had been hidden for decades. It led to independent newspapers, journals. People could even question the government. Big cultural shift.
Wow, that must have been exhilarating and terrifying all at once. But wait, I can say what now? So that's Glasnost. What about Perestroika? Changing minds, too.
Perestroika was more about tackling those practical problems. Gorbachev knew that centrally controlled economy, broken. So Perestroika, which means restructuring, it was about fixing it. Give businesses some freedom, encourage competition, kind of test the waters of a market economy.
So they were like trying to fix a flat tire while driving down the road. Sounds like a recipe for disaster, honestly.
You could say that, yeah. And all this is happening while the Soviet Union is fighting this costly and increasingly unpopular war in Afghanistan.
Oh, man, that's right. This lecture mentions that. So they're dealing with all this turmoil at home and this war. Talk about a mess.
It was a drain on everything.
Right.
Resources, morale, everything.
Yeah.
Gorbachev knew it was unwinnable, so he decides to withdraw Soviet forces.
Which I'm guessing didn't go over well with everyone back home.
You're right. The withdrawal, it began in 88, finished in 89. It was a turning point.
Ew.
Showed the world Gorbachev was serious about change, but it also, well, it sent a message to the Soviet republics themselves, you know? The Brezhnev Doctrine. Yeah, that was looking shaky.
Quick history lesson, Brezhnev Doctrine. Remind us again what that was all about.
Basically, it was the Soviet Union's way of controlling the Eastern Bloc. It basically said they could intervene with military force if any of those countries even thought about leaving the communist path.
So the Soviets pull out of Afghanistan, they ease up on Eastern Europe. I imagine the vibe shifted from don't even think about it to like, maybe we could try something.
Exactly. If the dominoes were lined up and they were about to start falling.
So the Soviet Union is sending out these not the boss of you vibes.
Whether they mean to or not.
And people in the Eastern Bloc are like, watch this.
I mean, we can't talk about this era without talking about the Berlin Wall coming down, right?
It was one of those moments you just had to watch on the news.
To see what would happen next.
People who had lived under Soviet control for decades.
Seeing that wall come down, families reunited.
Incredibly powerful.
Yeah, the ultimate symbol of an empire crumbling.
And it wasn't just Berlin.
This lecture talks about 1989 as like the year of revolutions in Eastern Europe.
Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia.
They all break free from Soviet control.
And mostly peacefully.
It's kind of amazing how fast it all happened.
It shows how much people wanted freedom.
They had been under Soviet rule for so long, their destinies controlled by Moscow.
But Gorbachev's reforms, that willingness to loosen control, it created an opportunity they couldn't ignore.
It's like if you give a mouse a cookie, but it's if you give a country a taste of freedom.
But not all revolutions are the same, are they? Romania, for example, went a different way.
Right. Romania, under Nicolae Ceausescu, it was a dictatorship.
Brutal one.
He held on tight even as the rest of the Eastern Bloc was changing.
So no peaceful protests or anything like that.
Sadly, no.
The Romanian Revolution was violent and chaotic.
Ceausescu was executed on Christmas Day, 1989.
Shows that fighting for freedom can be a long and difficult struggle.
Definitely something to think about.
So we have all this upheaval happening outside the Soviet Union.
But back home, things are getting tense too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's one of history's ironies, really.
Gorbachev's reforms were supposed to strengthen the Soviet Union
But they helped cause its downfall.
because they encouraged nationalist movements within the republics.
Like he accidentally gave everyone a lesson in how to dismantle an empire.
Yeah, kind of. These republics see the Eastern Bloc breaking away and they start thinking, why not us?
Lithuania was actually the first to declare independence in March of 1990.
Wow, that must have been a shock to the Kremlin.
Talk about a wake-up call.
It showed that things were out of control.
Gorbachev, he tried to hold everything together.
Even proposed a new treaty for a looser federation.
But it was too late. The republics wanted freedom. They weren't going to give that up.
So what did those in power, the hardliners in the Communist Party, what did they think of all this?
These were people who built their careers on the idea of a powerful Soviet Union.
They were panicking, to put it mildly.
They saw Gorbachev's reforms as a betrayal, a threat.
And they weren't going to go down without a fight.
Which brings us to the August coup of 1991.
Okay, now things get really interesting.
We're talking about an actual coup in Moscow.
Exactly.
These hardliners, they could see what was happening.
The Soviet Union was falling apart.
And they decided to take drastic measures.
They put Gorbachev under house arrest.
Tried to take control of the government.
Basically, they wanted to undo all of his reforms.
Talk about a bold move. But it backfired, right? Coups don't usually end well.
They completely misread the situation.
Remember Glasnost?
Years of frustration had been building up.
People were not going to be quiet anymore.
The coup led to huge protests.
Ordinary people went into the streets, risking their lives to oppose the coup.
And this is where Boris Yeltsin comes in, right?
He was the president of the Russian Republic.
Yes.
This was a truly amazing moment.
Yeltsin, who had criticized Gorbachev but also hated the coup,
He climbed onto a tank in front of the Russian parliament building.
and told the people to resist.
He became the symbol of the resistance against the coup leaders.
Okay, hold on. I need a second to process this.
Yeltsin, on a tank, facing down a coup. This is like movie stuff.
What happens next?
And-
Like a movie. Yeltsin on a tank, the whole Soviet Union hanging by a thread. So what happened?
It was a turning point. Yeltsin, he was defiant, and people saw that. It energized them. Even the military started pulling back their support from the coup leaders.
The whole thing just fell apart in like 3 days.
Wow, what a failure. So the coup collapses. Gorbachev is technically back. But what was the impact? Did he still have any power at that point?
It was pretty much the beginning of the end, the August coup. It was like a giant spotlight on all the cracks that were already there.
Gorbachev, yeah, he was released from house arrest, but his credibility was shot. And the republics, they saw what happened, and they were like, yeah, Soviet Union, it's over.
And they decided to take their chance,
Right,
right?
exactly. There was no going back. It was just a matter of time. And in December of that same year, 1991, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, they meet in secret. They sign this thing called the Belovezh Accords.
Wait, so those three republics they ended it. Just like that. No big fight, no dramatic showdown, just a meeting and some signatures.
Yeah, it's kind of wild when you think about it. This empire, the Soviet Union, it was supposed to be invincible. And then, poof, gone. Like that. Gorbachev resigned. It was December 25th, 1991. And that was that. The Soviet flag came down from over the Kremlin, and up went the Russian flag.
It's really hard to wrap your head around how something so permanent, so powerful could just disappear.
It reminds you that history, it's not set in stone. Things change sometimes really fast.
Absolutely. And even now, we're still seeing the after effects of the Soviet Union's collapse.
Right, like an echo that never quite fades away.
Totally. Russia and the former republics, they had to figure out this whole market economy thing, and it was brutal for a lot of people. And then the conflicts, Chechnya, Georgia, Ukraine, it's like even when empires are gone, they can still cast a long shadow.
It's a lot to take in, but it's so important to learn about. Thanks for geeking out with me on this, diving into the collapse of the Soviet Union with this lecture. It's been amazing.
The pleasure was all mine. These are the moments in history that really make you think.
I hear that. And listeners, here's something to chew on. If you had been there in 1989, standing in the shadow of the Berlin Wall, would you have believed it was about to fall? Until next time, keep exploring.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.